The phone rang at 2:03 a.m., sharp, urgent, and wrong for that hour. Noah Arden almost didn't answer. He'd been sitting on the edge of his couch, one hand wrapped around his daughter's inhaler, the other pressing against his temple, trying to quiet the headache that never really left him anymore. "Mr. Arden?" The voice on the other end was gentle, practiced. "This is Rebecca from St. Mary's Transplant Coordination. I'm sorry to call so late, but you asked to be notified the moment we confirmed compatibility." His throat tightened. "Compatibility?" "Yes," she said softly. "You're a full match for the recipient on the waiting list. If you're still willing, we can begin the pre-op process next week." For a moment, silence filled the small apartment. The refrigerator hummed. A stray car horn moaned outside. He stared at the inhaler in his palm, tiny pink, covered in cartoon stickers his daughter had placed there, and felt his heartbeat slow. He hadn't thought they'd call so soon. He hadn't even told anyone he'd signed up. "Yeah," he said finally, voice hoarse. "I'm still willing." The coordinator paused, almost as if she was surprised. "Thank you, Mr. Arden. You'll be saving someone's life." When he hung up, the room was still and heavy. He leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. A woman he'd never met. A stranger who might not live to see another month. And somehow, his blood, his flesh would keep her alive. In the quiet, he whispered the thought that had lived inside him for years. "If I can save someone's tomorrow, maybe my past will finally stop haunting me." By the time dawn cracked through the blinds, the smell of motor oil already clung to Noah Arden's hands. He'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table again, half-empty mug, bills scattered like loose bolts across the surface, and a crayon drawing taped above the light switch. It was a picture of a smiling man fixing a car under a rainbow. Ella had written in crooked letters, "My dad fixes everything." It made him smile every morning, even when the weight in his chest said otherwise. The apartment was small, one bedroom, one living room, both patched together with the quiet resourcefulness of a man who couldn't afford to waste anything. Dishes dried on a rack that leaned sideways. The heater rattled when the wind blew, and the old clock on the wall ran 4 minutes late. But there was warmth here, the kind that didn't come from insulation. Ella shuffled out of her room in her pink pajamas, hair tangled, dragging a stuffed bear by one arm. "Morning, Daddy," she murmured. "Morning, Peanut." He poured her a bowl of cereal, pretending not to notice that the milk was a day past its date. She sat at the table, kicking her feet. "Did you fix the blue car last night?" "Almost," he said, yawning. "Transmission was acting up. I'll finish it after lunch." She nodded solemnly, as if transmissions were part of her vocabulary. That was Ella, curious, bright, and far too grown for 8 years old. Her mother used to say she had an old soul. Chloe had been that way too, soft-spoken, stubborn, and endlessly kind. The kind of person who apologized to spiders before setting them outside. It had been her kidneys that betrayed her, not her heart. The disease crept in quietly, the way winter creeps into a leaky house, a slow, unstoppable chill. Noah had spent 2 years watching her fade under hospital lights, his hands always busy fixing something. Her blanket, the IV line, the chair beside her bed, anything to keep from accepting what couldn't be fixed. When she was gone, he thought the silence would break him. Then Ella cried in her sleep that first night, whispering, "Mommy, it's okay," and Noah found his reason to keep breathing. Now, years later, that grief had hardened into routine, the kind that keeps a man moving because stopping means remembering. He worked at a small neighborhood garage, the kind that smelled of rubber, sweat, and loyalty. His boss, Reggie, was old school, smoked cheap cigars, and paid cash on Fridays. The pay wasn't much, but the work was steady. Noah liked it that way. Machines made sense. They didn't lie, didn't leave. If something broke, you could trace the problem, replace the part, and bring it back to life. If only people worked that way. He clocked in by 7 each morning, hands stained, sleeves rolled. Cars came in with stories, some angry, some desperate, some hopeful. A young couple arguing in the waiting room, a mother with her toddler asleep in the back seat, a delivery driver who couldn't afford another delay. He listened, nodded, and fixed what he could. He always did. By evening, he'd return home to Ella and the sound of cartoons. They'd sit on the couch, her sketchbook balanced on her knees while he helped her with spelling homework. She'd ask questions about words like promise and forever. He never knew how to answer them. Her health had been stable lately, remission, the doctor said, but every cough still froze his heart. There were times when she'd wake up pale and tired, and Noah would check her temperature 3 times before breakfast. The memory of Chloe's hospital beeping haunted him like an old song that never stopped playing. That was what made the donation idea take root. Not out of heroism, out of helplessness. He remembered sitting in a waiting room years ago, watching strangers pass by, praying that someone, anyone would step forward to save the woman he loved. No one did. Now, when he'd heard about a patient with no family, no match, something inside him had stirred, something quiet and aching. He didn't know the woman's name, didn't need to, it just felt right. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was faith, maybe it was the need to believe the world still had second chances. That night after dinner, Ella crawled onto his lap with her sketchbook. "Draw with me," she said, pressing a crayon into his hand. He smiled and drew two stick figures holding hands beside a crooked sun. "That us?" She nodded. "You're fixing my bike." He laughed softly. "Do I ever stop fixing things?" "No," she said matter-of-factly. "You fix everything, Daddy." The words hit harder than she knew. He swallowed the lump in his throat, kissed the top of her head and stared at the drawing for a long time after she fell asleep. He didn't fix everything. Not even close. But tomorrow, maybe he could fix one thing that mattered. Across town, on the 37th floor of a glass tower that scraped the morning clouds, Clara Vance stood before the mirror in her office washroom. The woman staring back looked flawless. Neat bun, charcoal suit, diamond studs. No one would guess that beneath the pressed fabric, a body was failing her inch by inch. Outside, her assistant's heels clicked nervously across the marble floor. "Ma'am, the Singapore call is ready in conference A." "Tell them to wait," Clara said, applying a touch of lipstick, steady hands betraying none of the tremor that had begun to visit her in recent weeks. She stepped into the corridor, all edges and deficiency. When Clara walked by, conversations stopped. She was the kind of leader who turned silence into an art form. Advanced Technologies, her name was law. The staff admired her genius and feared her precision. She'd built the company from a college apartment into a multi-billion-dollar empire of smart devices and biotech sensors. Every corner of the building bore her signature, sleek, minimal, mercilessly clean. But power had its own loneliness. She'd traded laughter for late-night spreadsheets, friends for quarterly targets. Success had made her untouchable, and isolation had become the armor she wore best. At noon, her private physician, Dr. Leone, arrived carrying a tablet and the kind of face that never brought good news. Clara barely looked up from her laptop. "Make it quick, doctor. I have a press interview at 1. "Clara," he said gently, "we've run every combination of treatment. Dialysis is no longer stabilizing your levels. Without a transplant in 3 weeks, your systems will start collapsing." The words landed like quiet thunder. She finished typing a sentence before replying. "Schedule the board meeting first," she said. Leone sighed. "I'm serious. Your numbers." "I'm serious too," she cut in, eyes still on the screen. "If I fall apart, this company does too." He hesitated, then slid the tablet across the desk. "You can't keep pretending this is about work. You need rest, and a donor, soon." She dismissed him with a polite nod, waited until the door closed, then sank back in her chair, the mask slipping for the first time all day. The ache in her lower back pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She pressed a hand to her side and exhaled slowly. 3 weeks. Her phone buzzed, a reminder about the new product launch, followed by another from the PR team asking for approval on her upcoming magazine cover. Power and vision, Clara Vance, the woman who never slows down. The irony almost made her laugh. From the corner window she could see the entire city glittering beneath her, a kingdom of her own making. Glass, steel and motion. People rushing, cars streaming like veins of light. She had everything anyone could want, except time. She reached for the crystal water glass on her desk, her hand trembling just slightly. The first swallow felt bitter. In the quiet, the hum of the air conditioner was the only sound. She thought of her parents, both gone before they could see what she'd built. Of the few friends she'd once had who had long stopped calling after too many canceled dinners. Relationships had become transactions, conversations, strategies. There was no room for tenderness in the empire she'd made. Her reflection in the window looked almost foreign now. Same sharp suit, same measured expression, but something hollow flickered behind the eyes. Her intercom blinked. "Ms. Vance," her assistant said cautiously. "The press team's waiting." Clara stood, smoothing her jacket. "Send them in." 10 minutes later, flashbulbs burst like lightning as the interviewer gushed about her brilliance. "Miss Vance, what drives you to keep pushing boundaries when you've already achieved so much?" Clara smiled, the perfect practiced smile. "Because standing still," she said, "is another form of dying." They clapped. She kept smiling. When the door finally closed behind them, the fatigue hit like a wave. She leaned against her desk, knuckles white, breath shallow. Her assistant poked in timidly. "Lunch, ma'am?" Later she whispered. That night, long after the lights of the building dimmed and the cleaners moved like ghosts through the halls, Clara remained in her office. A half-finished report glowed on her screen. She read the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing a word. In the stillness, she thought of the doctor's warning again. 3 weeks. It sounded like a countdown, ticking just beneath the hum of the city. She opened the window slightly, letting the cold air sting her face. Far below, headlights streamed through rain-slick streets, countless lives moving, colliding, existing beyond her reach. Somewhere down there, people were holding hands, laughing, cooking dinner, ordinary moments she'd long stopped allowing herself. Her hand drifted to her side again. Pain radiated through her ribs, sharper this time. She closed her eyes and murmured under her breath, half prayer, half confession, "Just let me get through this quarter." In the darkness of that corner office, surrounded by everything she had ever wanted, Clara Vance realized she had no one left who would notice if she didn't. It started, as most turning points do, by accident. Noah had taken Ella to the clinic that Friday afternoon. She'd been coughing more than usual, and although the doctor said it was nothing serious, his nerves never quite believed it. While Ella played with her sticker book in the waiting area, Noah stood by the coffee machine, half listening to the soft chatter behind the nurse's counter. "Still no donor match," one of them sighed. "She doesn't have any family listed. Poor woman, she's too young for this," the other nurse murmured. "Without a transplant soon, her organs will shut down. 3 weeks at best." Their words weren't meant for him, but they sank deep. Noah's hand tightened around the paper cup until it crumpled. He'd heard that tone before, the quiet pity of professionals talking about someone already halfway gone. He turned slightly, his voice low. "Excuse me," he said, "you said she doesn't have a match?" The nurse looked startled, then softened when she saw his worn uniform and tired eyes. "It's a confidential case, sir, but yes, there's a patient in renal failure. No family, no possible donors." Noah hesitated. His pulse quickened. The question formed before logic could stop it. What if someone wanted to be tested, even if they didn't know her? She blinked. "You'd want to donate?" He nodded, uncertainly at first, then with growing conviction. Nobody should die waiting. The nurse studied him, searching his face for any sign of pretense. She saw only exhaustion and sincerity. "We can run preliminary labs. It's a long process, but it starts with a blood door." Noah filled out the forms in shaky handwriting, unaware that his name would be hidden behind anonymous codes, his signature replaced by an ID number. By the time he pressed his thumbprint onto the consent sheet, something inside him felt lighter, like he'd set down a weight he'd been carrying for years. That night, back at the garage, the world carried on as if nothing had changed. The same clatter of wrenches, the same hum of engines, but Noah felt a strange calm under the noise, as if purpose had quietly parked itself beside him. He didn't tell anyone, not Reggie, not the neighbors, not even Ella. Some things weren't meant to be explained. When he closed up shop, he stood for a long while under the flickering neon sign, watching moths circle the light. The world was full of broken things, machines, people, promises. Maybe fixing one small part of it was enough. Across the city, in her high-rise apartment, Clara Vance sat in the dark, the glow of her phone screen washing over her pale face. The latest report from her assistant listed a dozen potential donor matches, all false leads. She had stopped reading halfway through. The pain in her side pulsed steadily, a reminder that her empire couldn't buy her more time. She'd dismissed her medical team hours earlier, exhausted by their rehearsed optimism. Leaning back against the couch, she whispered to the empty room, "Who in this world would ever give without wanting something back?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the city noise below seemed to hold its breath. She thought of her colleagues, the board members who smiled at her in meetings and plotted behind her back. She thought of her estranged brother in Switzerland who hadn't answered her last message. And the friends, if that word still applied, who had stopped inviting her anywhere years ago. The only light came from a framed photo on the wall. Her company's first prototype, taken in a cramped basement 15 years earlier. She'd built everything from scratch. Every victory, every headline, every award had been earned. But now, staring at her reflection in the glass, she saw only fatigue and a faint shadow of fear she couldn't quite admit aloud. 3 weeks. That's what the doctor had said. Her phone buzzed again, a calendar reminder for a strategy meeting. She swiped it away and turned off the screen. The apartment plunged into darkness. Meanwhile, Noah lay awake on the couch, unable to sleep. The apartment was quiet except for Ella's soft breathing through the cracked bedroom door. On the table beside him sat a folded hospital pamphlet about living donation. He ran his finger over the words Anonymous Donor Program. He didn't know the woman's name. He didn't need to. Somewhere a stranger's life was running out of time, and maybe, just maybe, he could change that. He thought about Chloe, about the way her hand had felt in his during those final weeks in the hospital. The doctors had said they were still looking for a match. They never found one. He whispered into the dark, "Maybe this is how I make it right." On the other side of the city, Clara pressed her hand against her side and whispered almost the same words, but in reverse. "Maybe this is how it ends." The two of them, different worlds, different fates, lay awake beneath the same moonlight, each trapped in a silence that the other could one day break. Neither of them knew that by morning, their paths would begin to bend quietly toward each other. 3 weeks slipped by in the rhythm of ordinary days. Noah worked, cooked, and checked the mail with the same slow, steady motion of a man who couldn't afford surprises. Then the phone rang again. He almost didn't pick up. He was elbow deep in an engine at the shop, sweat rolling down his temple, the radio murmuring static. When he saw the hospital number, something inside him froze. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside into the sunlight. "Mr. Arden?" a woman's voice said, calm but formal. "This is Helen from St. Mary's Transplant Coordination. We have your results." He leaned against the wall, heart pounding. "And you're a perfect match." For a moment all he heard was the sound of traffic from the street, the metallic clang of a distant wrench. "A match?" "Yes, sir. The recipient's team is ready to move forward if you're still willing. We can schedule pre-operative evaluations this week." He didn't answer. His tongue felt thick, his chest tight. The words "perfect match" echoed like a verdict. Helen continued gently. "You don't have to decide right now, but we'll need confirmation soon. I'll call you back," he murmured, and ended the call. The world didn't look different, but it felt different. The sunlight was too bright, the noise too sharp. He stared at his reflection in the window, seeing both the donor and the father, the selfless Anne and the scared one. Inside the garage, Reggie shouted, "Noah, you coming or what? We got a pickup waiting." "Yeah," he said quietly, pocketing the phone. "Coming." That evening, he couldn't eat. The decision sat heavy in his chest, heavier than the fear itself. If he went through with it, he'd be out of work for at least 2 weeks. Reggie wouldn't be able to hold his spot that long, not with the backlog they had. 2 weeks without pay meant late rent, unpaid bills, and maybe no groceries. But if he didn't do it, someone would die. He tried to reason with himself. Maybe they'd find another donor. Maybe she'd get help somewhere else. But even as he thought it, he knew he was lying. That night, Ella was sprawled across the couch with a blanket tangled around her legs, the TV flickering over her small, sleeping face. The soft whistle of her breathing filled the room, steady, calm. Noah sat in the armchair across from her, hands clasped, elbows on his knees. The glow from the screen painted her in blue light, and for a moment she looked so much like Chloe that his throat ached. He remembered the night Chloe's doctor had told them there were no more options. He remembered her whispering, "Promise me you'll keep fixing things." He'd promised. He rubbed his palms together, staring at the thin scar on his wrist from an old repair job. His hands were all he had, his trade, his survival, and yet here he was, about to give away far more irreplaceable. He whispered to the quiet room, "I can't lose this job, baby girl, but I can't look away either." Ella stirred, rolling onto her side, her stuffed bear clutched to her chest. She looked peaceful, untouched by the noise of adult worry. Noah stood and knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. He whispered, "You deserve a world that still has people who care, even when it costs them something." The television hummed faintly, the cartoon credits rolling. His eyes glistened, and the words came out in a whisper, half prayer, half conviction. "If I can give life, maybe she'll grow up in a world that still believes in good." The next morning, he called the hospital back. His voice didn't shake this time. "I'm in," he said. Helen's tone softened. "We'll take care of everything, Mr. Arden. You're doing a beautiful thing." He hung up and looked around the apartment, the cracked tiles, the leaning bookshelf, the half-finished drawing taped to the wall. It wasn't much, but it was home. He checked on Ella one last time before heading to work. She was still asleep, her tiny hand curled around her bear. He tucked the blanket higher under her chin and smiled faintly. At the garage, he told Reggie he'd need some time off soon. "Medical thing," he said vaguely. Reggie frowned. "You all right?" "Yeah, nothing to worry about, Just fixing something inside me, I guess. Reggie clapped him on the shoulder. Take care of yourself, kid. Work'll be here when you're ready. Noah nodded, but in his gut he wasn't sure. Later that day, while changing attire, he caught himself staring at the grease-stained floor and thinking of the unknown woman, the one whose face he couldn't imagine, whose name he might never know. He thought about what it meant to give something to someone who couldn't repay it, to reach across a world of strangers and leave a piece of yourself there. When he closed up shop that night, he felt strangely calm. The fear hadn't vanished, but purpose had taken its place. As he walked home under the fading light, he whispered again, almost to himself, maybe this time, I'll actually fix something that stays fixed. The morning of the surgery arrived quietly without ceremony. No one in Noah's small world knew what he was about to do. Not the neighbors, not his boss, not even Ella. He'd told her he was helping at the hospital for a few days, a maintenance job, he'd said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Now, lying in a thin hospital gown on a narrow bed, he felt the strangeness of it all settle deep in his bones. The fluorescent light hummed above him. The walls smelled faintly of disinfectant and lemon polish. A nurse moved gently around him, taping down the IV line on his arm. You doing okay, Mr. Arden? She asked softly. He nodded, forcing a breath through his lungs. Just ready to get it over with. She smiled, the kind of smile meant to calm nerves, not erase them. You're doing something rare, she said. Something people don't forget, even if they never know your name. He wanted to answer, but his throat had closed. He managed a small nod. The nurse squeezed his hand before stepping away. When they began to wheel him toward the operating room, the wheels of the bed made a soft rolling sound that echoed through the corridor. It reminded him of the nights he'd pushed Ella's stroller down cracked sidewalks, humming lullabies under the streetlights. A different kind of lullaby waited here, sterile and quiet, full of machines that hummed like distant seas. He closed his eyes as the anesthesia mask came down. The last thing he saw was the faint reflection of ceiling lights bending into white halos. Then the dream came. He was standing in a field of sunlight, the kind that smelled like summer after rain. Chloe stood in front of him, smiling. Her hair moved gently in the wind, her eyes the same soft brown that Ella had inherited. This is what love looks like when it keeps going, she said. Her voice was light, a sound you could almost see. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back, pointing toward a horizon he couldn't see. Keep fixing things, Noah. That's who you are. He wanted to tell her he was scared, that he couldn't promise to come back, but she only smiled again and said, You already have. Her figure blurred into light, and then there was nothing. When he woke, the world was pale and soft around the edges. There was pain, a deep, pulling ache at his side, but it wasn't sharp. It was a steady throb like the heartbeat of something new. Mr. Arden? A voice said. The same nurse. You're in recovery. Everything went smoothly. You did great. He wanted to speak but only managed a whisper. Is she? The recipient's stable, the nurse said gently. She's in post-op upstairs. The kidney started functioning right away. He closed his eyes. Relief spread through him like warmth. Somewhere in some other room a stranger was breathing easier because of him. A tear slipped from the corner of his eye. The nurse didn't mention it. She just adjusted the blanket and left him to rest. Hours passed in blurs of half-sleep. Sometimes he dreamed of Ella's laugh, sometimes of Chloe's hands. Once, in the middle of the night, he woke and whispered into the dark, Thank you for letting me be part of something good. He drifted off again. On another floor, Clara Vance was surfacing from a fog she hadn't realized she'd been living in for years. The hum of machines surrounded her, rhythmic, gentle, steady. Her eyelids fluttered. The world swam into view in slow frame ceiling lights, a wall clock, the faint murmur of voices behind glass. Something was missing. For a moment panic stirred, the absence of a familiar sound. Then she understood. The dialysis machine was gone. For the first time in months, her body wasn't screaming. The pain, that grinding, relentless ache, was gone, replaced by quiet. She inhaled deeply. The air filled her lungs in one clean sweep, unbroken. It felt almost unreal. Her doctor appeared beside her, smiling faintly. Welcome back, Miss Vance. Clara blinked, voice raspy. Is it done? It's done, he said. You have a strong new kidney, already showing excellent response. She stared at him for a long time, her lips parting slightly. It's working? It's working, he confirmed. Her throat tightened. Who was it? The doctor hesitated, then shook his head. Anonymous. That was the agreement. Clara turned her gaze toward the window. Morning light spilled across the curtain, soft and gold. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped in her own skin. She whispered, barely audible, "Someone saved me." The doctor smiled. Yes, they did. When he left, Clara lay still, listening to the sound of her own breathing. It was steady, strong, a rhythm that didn't need machines to sustain it anymore. She thought of the phrase anonymous donor. It sounded clinical, impersonal. But whoever that person was, they had given her more than an organ. They had given her time, the one currency she'd run out of. The thought was unbearable in its enormity. She pressed her palm against her side, feeling the faint outline of the surgical dressing. Beneath it, life pulsed, someone else's life, intertwining with her own. Tears welled, surprising her. She hadn't cried in years, not when she lost friends, not when she'd been betrayed, not even when she'd signed her will in preparation for the worst. But now a single tear escaped, trailing down her temple. She whispered again, to no one, "Thank you." Days passed, stitched together by slow recovery. Noah began walking before the doctors wanted him to. Each step was a negotiation between pain and pride. He didn't complain. He just gripped the railing, inch by inch, until he could cross the hallway unaided. He called Ella every night from his hospital bed. "How's my girl?" he'd ask. "I'm good, Daddy," she'd say. "Mrs. Gable made pancakes. I saved you one, but it's probably flat now." He laughed softly. "Keep it safe anyway. I'll need it when I get home." He never told her what had really happened. Some truths were too heavy for a child to carry. Each morning, a nurse would check his vitals, smile and say, "Your labs look great. You're healing fast." Each night when the ward quieted, Noah would think of the person on the other side of this exchange, the one whose face he'd never see. He pictured her as someone's mother, someone's sister, someone waiting for another sunrise she almost didn't get. And in a way he was content not knowing. Some gifts only stay pure in silence. Meanwhile, on the top floor, Clara took her first unaided steps in months. The city stretched out below her through the window, alive and different, dazzling. She felt smaller now, and oddly freer. When her doctor entered, clipboard in hand, she asked again, "You're sure they don't want recognition? No name, no message?" He shook his head. "They requested full anonymity. It's rare but not unheard of." She nodded slowly, staring out the window. "Then I suppose I'll thank them in my own way." "Perhaps that's exactly what they wanted," the doctor said softly. Clara smiled faintly. "Someone who gives like that doesn't want thanks. They just want to know the world can still be kind." She turned her gaze toward the horizon, where the sun was climbing through layers of gold. Somewhere out there, a stranger had given her back her life. Somewhere out there, she hoped, that stranger was healing too. And though their paths had never crossed, their hearts had in the silent, sacred space where one life chooses to save another. For the first time in months, Clara Vance woke up to silence that didn't terrify her. No machines, no alarms, no hum of the dialysis pump that had been her lullaby for half a year, only the soft rhythm of her own breathing, and the distant murmur of morning traffic far below her window. She'd been discharged 2 days ago, the doctors smiling like they were sending off a miracle. Her numbers were perfect. Her color had returned. Her body, once a prison of pain, felt light, new, almost unfamiliar. But inside, something else had taken root. A need, a restless, gnawing need to know. The anonymity clause was supposed to bring peace, but for Clara it only created torment. Who was he, or she, this phantom who had given her a piece of their life without ever asking for thanks? What kind of soul gave away part of themselves to a stranger? Her doctor had called the donor extraordinary. That word haunted her. By the third day she found herself pacing her penthouse, coffee untouched, papers scattered across her dining table. She'd already called the hospital's board and donated $2 million to fund a new transplant wing. It wasn't enough. Money was the only language she knew, but it didn't buy her what she wanted. The truth. She called her assistant, voice sharp with purpose. "Find me a private investigator," she said. "Quiet, discreet, reliable." "Of course, Ms. Vance. May I ask?" "You may not." When she hung up, she pressed her palm to her abdomen where the faint ache of the incision still lingered. Beneath her skin lived a stranger's gift, his blood, his cells, his life, thrumming inside her as if whispering, "Remember me." That whisper wouldn't leave her alone. Across town, Noah Arden sat on the edge of his worn sofa, tugging at the hem of his shirt. The apartment smelled faintly of detergent and rain. Mrs. Gable had insisted on doing their laundry while he recovered. The hospital had discharged him 2 days earlier with a smile and a pamphlet. Follow up in 2 weeks. Keep the incision clean. Avoid lifting heavy objects. He had nodded, thanked them, and signed the release forms with a trembling hand. He didn't tell them that 2 weeks of rest meant 2 weeks without pay, and 2 weeks without pay meant rent hanging by a thread. Now, home again, he watched his daughter race across the living room, her laughter filling every empty corner. "Daddy, look," Ella said, standing on the couch, arms spread like wings. "I'm a superhero." He smiled, though pain burned under his ribs. "You sure are, Peanut." She jumped down and landed beside him, eyeing the bandage under his shirt. "Does it hurt?" "A little," he admitted. Her small fingers hovered above the spot. "You look like a superhero who gave his power away." Her words hit him harder than any painkillers could dull. He smiled through the ache. "Maybe I did." She giggled, then leaned her head on his shoulder. "That's okay. You still have enough power for me." He hugged her gently, blinking fast. When she went to bed, he sat alone at the window, staring at the city lights. Somewhere out there, the woman he'd helped was probably walking under the same sky, breathing the same air, living because of him. That thought should have brought peace, but instead there was an emptiness he couldn't name, a strange mix of exhaustion and relief that tangled together like frayed wires. The incision itched constantly. By the 5th day, it had started to sting. He brushed it off as normal healing. When the pain deepened into a pulsing throb, he pressed a damp towel against it and told himself it would pass. Hospitals were for people who had insurance and options. He had neither. Instead, he went back to the garage 2 days earlier than the doctor advised. Reggie frowned when he walked in. "You sure you're up for this?" "I'm fine," Noah said, pulling on his gloves. Every motion felt heavier, the wrenches, the tires, even his breath. Still he worked slowly, quietly, like a man trying to outrun pain by pretending it wasn't there. By noon, the bandage had soaked through. He ducked into the restroom, unwrapped it, and hissed. The incision had reopened slightly, just a thin red line, but enough to make him dizzy. He cleaned it with alcohol, gritted his teeth and pulled his shirt back down. "Keep going," he told himself. "You can't afford to stop." Meanwhile, Clara's investigator, a gray-haired man named Fletcher, sat across from her in her office. "You're certain you want to pursue this?" he asked. "Anonymous donations are legally sealed. There'll be barriers." "Barriers can be removed," Clara replied coolly. "Start with blood type, timing, hospital logs. Someone there knows something." Fletcher nodded. "And if they don't want to be found?" She paused, eyes narrowing. "Everyone wants something." But later, when she stood by the window staring at the skyline, those words felt hollow. What if he truly didn't want anything? What if this person existed outside the rules she lived by? The transactions, the leverage, the power games. The thought unsettled her more than she expected. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw faceless figures lying on hospital beds, rows of nameless donors whose bodies carried stories she'd never know. She woke before dawn, sweaty and trembling, the faint throb of her healing wound sinking with her heartbeat. She whispered into the darkness, "Why me?" No answer. Only silence in the distant hum of the city she owned, but could no longer control. Noah's nights grew longer too. The ache in his side worsened, spreading through his ribs like fire. He wrapped it tighter, trying to hide it from Ella. When she asked why he winced while lifting her school bag, he said, "Old man bones." Mrs. Gable, bless her, noticed anyway. "You're pale as a sheet, Noah. That scar looks angry. You need to get that checked." "I'll be fine," he said, forcing a smile. "Just needs time." She frowned. Time doesn't heal everything. He knew she was right, but pride was cheaper than treatment. That night, after tucking Ella into bed, he sank onto the couch and pressed his hand against the bandage. The pain flared so sharply it took his breath. For a moment, he wondered if this was how Chloe had felt. The slow, inevitable pull of something inside you breaking down. He didn't regret it. Not for a second. He just wished doing the right thing didn't always hurt this much. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Wherever you are, I hope you're living your second chance." Across the city, Clara sat in a boardroom nodding mechanically through presentations she barely heard. Her mind was elsewhere, on blood reports, medical files, and the elusive identity of her savior. After the meeting, she returned to her penthouse, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window. The city glowed beneath her, alive and unaware. She placed her hand over her scar and thought, "Someone out there is missing what I now carry." That realization didn't comfort her. It broke her. Because for the first time in her perfectly ordered life, Clara Vance felt indebted, Not in money or power, but in soul. And she didn't know how to live with that. In two different parts of the same city, two hearts beat in quiet opposition. One healed but hollow, one hurting but proud. The giver was fading in silence. The receiver was learning, painfully, what gratitude really cost. And though neither knew it, their paths were already bending toward each other once more, drawn together by the very thing that had already tied their lives in blood. It began with a name that wasn't supposed to exist. Arden, Fletcher said, placing a slim folder on Clara's desk. Noah Arden, mechanic, registered at St. Mary's Public Clinic, blood type O negative, title parent. Clara's pulse quickened. And the hospital? Same donor number as your transplant record. The files were scrubbed, but I know how to read what's left between the lines. She stared at the folder as if it might vanish. There was a photograph clipped to the corner, a man standing beside an old tow truck, sleeves rolled up, grease on his forearms. He was smiling. There was something weary in it, like a man who smiled only for others. For a moment Clara couldn't breathe. This was the person who had given her a second life. Not a wealthy philanthropist. Not some corporate do-gooder. A mechanic. A man who probably had no idea she existed. Where is he now, she asked. Fletcher hesitated. Still in the city. Owns a small auto shop near the industrial district. Working again, though his file mentions post-surgical complications. Her stomach twisted. Complications. Reopened incision. Mild infection. He refused further care. Clara's throat went dry. She closed the folder slowly, fingers trembling. Thank you, Fletcher. You can stop now. He looked at her with faint disapproval. Ma'am, this is the part where people usually send flowers or money. She gave a faint smile. That's exactly why I'm not them. After he left, Clara sat in silence, the rain tapping softly against the glass. Beneath her designer blouse, the faint ache of her scar pulsed, not with pain but with something deeper. Shame. He'd given her life, and she'd gone on living it like nothing had changed. By evening the rain had thickened to a gray curtain. Clara insisted on driving herself, ignoring her driver's protests. The GPS led her through narrow streets lined with warehouses and flickering streetlights, until the city's polish gave way to rust and puddles. She found the sign easily enough. Arden Auto Repair, the paint peeling, the lights still on. As she slowed at the corner, her dashboard flashed red, engine temperature high. Then came the hiss, the sputter, and finally the silence. Her luxury sedan rolled to a stop right in front of the garage, steam curling from under the hood. For a moment she almost laughed. Of course. She stepped out into the rain, her heels sinking slightly into the wet gravel. The air smelled of oil and rainwater. Inside, the sound of tools clinking carried through the open bay. A man emerged from under a car hood, wiping his hands with a rag. His hair was damp with sweat, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, a faint line of exhaustion across his face. When he looked up, Clara's breath caught. She'd studied his photograph all afternoon, but reality felt heavier. He looked older up close. Not in years but in miles. The kind of man who carried responsibility like an extra organ. He didn't recognize her. Of course he didn't. Evening, he said, his voice rough but warm. Car trouble? Yes, she replied, her voice quieter than intended. It just died on me. He chuckled softly. They all say that. Let's take a look. He popped the hood, steam bellowing out in a rush. Rain speckled his hair, the droplets sliding down the curve of his jaw. Looks like you overheated, he said, leaning in. Probably the radiator hose. I can patch it up, but you'll need a full replacement soon. Clara nodded, unable to look away from the faint outline of the surgical scar beneath his shirt collar. The same side as hers. The same pain, shared unknowingly. How long will it take? She asked, trying to steady her voice. 15, 20 minutes. You can wait inside if you want. It's warmer there. She followed him into the garage. The air smelled of grease and coffee. A small heater buzzed near a workbench covered with tools and half-finished repairs. In the corner sat a child's drawing, stick pics, a house, a son with a smile. He noticed her looking. My daughter, he said. 8 going on 25. She runs this place better than I do. She's talented, Clara said softly. He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't need practice.
Yeah.
Keeps me going. They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the heater filling the air. Clara wanted to speak, to say you kept me going too, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead she asked, do you like what you do? He looked surprised, fixing cars.
Yes.
He chuckled. It's honest work. Things break, you fix them. There's a kind of peace in that. He paused, glancing at her. What about you? You look someone who doesn't get her hands dirty much. She smiled faintly. You're right, my work is different. What do you do? I run a company. Big one? She shrugged. Big enough to make me tired of it sometimes. He grinned. Yeah, I get that. Something in his tone, gentle, without envy, disarmed her completely. People usually treated her like a nameplate, a paycheck, but Noah spoke to her like a person who wasn't trying to impress or calculate. He checked the gauge, adjusted a clamp, then turned back to her. All right, you're good to go. Try not to drive it too hard in this rain. She handed him her card automatically. I'll have my assistant handle the payment. He glanced at it, smiled politely, and shook his head. Nah. Just call it even. Even, she repeated, startled. Yeah, he said simply. World's rough enough these days. Nice to help someone make it home safe. The irony of his words hit her like a punch. Nice to help someone make it home safe. That's exactly what he had done. Only she hadn't known it until now. Her throat tightened. You don't even know me. He shrugged. Doesn't matter. Doesn't cost much to be decent. Clara swallowed hard, her hand tightening around the umbrella handle. You're a good man, Miss. He wiped his hands on the rag again, smiling faintly. Arden. Noah Arden. The sound of his name from his own lips made something inside her tremble. He extended his hand, unaware of the gravity of that gesture. And you are Clara, she said softly. Just Clara. His grip was warm, strong, steady. The same hands that had once held her life without ever knowing it. When she released him, her palm felt cold. Well, he said, nodding toward the car. You're all set. Drive safe, Clara. She nodded, unable to find her voice. Thank you, Noah. As she slid into the driver's seat, rain streaking the windshield, she caught one last glimpse of him in the mirror, standing in the doorway of his small garage, waving absently before returning to his work. The engine hummed back to life, smoother now, alive again, just like her. But this time, every beat of that engine echoed with the truth she couldn't yet speak. She drove away slowly, her reflection caught in the rearview mirror, whispering to herself, You saved me once, Noah Arden, and you don't even know it. Outside, the rain softened, but inside her a storm had just begun. The storm of knowing she owed everything to the man who had asked for nothing at all. Clara told herself it was business. That was the lie she rehearsed as she sat in her car outside Arden Auto Repair 3 days later, pretending to check her phone. She'd called ahead this time, claiming her radiator still leaked. Noah had sounded warm, unsuspecting, the way decent people always sound when they don't expect anything from you. Rain had passed, but the sky remained overcast, soft gray light spilling across the wet pavement. She caught her reflection in the glass, and barely recognized it. For once, the flawless CEO armor was gone. Just a woman, holding a paper cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the doorway of the man who'd unknowingly saved her life. She took a deep breath and stepped out. Inside, the familiar scent of oil and steel wrapped around her. Noah was bent over a car hood, sleeves rolled, his movements slower than before. He looked tired, not the simple kind of tired, but the kind that came from fighting pain in silence. When he noticed her, he wiped his hands and smiled. You again? Me again, she said, forcing a small laugh. The patch didn't hold. Figures, he said. These high-end models always come back. They hate the real world. Clara smiled, but her throat ached. You have no idea how close to the truth that is. He motioned toward the small waiting area. Give me half an hour. There's lemonade on the counter. My daughter made it this morning. Your daughter? Ella, he said proudly. She's the boss around here. Before Clara could reply, a small voice piped up from the doorway. Daddy, I finished my picture. Clara turned, startled. A little girl stood there holding a crayon, drawing almost as big as she was. Dark curls framed a bright open face, and her smile carried the same warmth as her father's. Noah grinned. Ella, this is Miss Clara. Be polite. Ella marched forward confidently, thrusting the paper toward her. Want to see my art? Clara knelt slightly. I'd love to. The paper was crowded with color stick figures. A bed, a bright yellow light above it. The figure in the bed had a brown beard and closed eyes. Above him, a smaller figure, a woman, lauded in the light, surrounded by hearts. It's my dad, Ella explained. When he was in the hospital, and that's Mommy in heaven, saying she's proud of him. Clara froze, every detail cut sharper than a scalpel. Noah's soft laugh filled the silence. She's got a wild imagination. Ella shook her head. It's not imagination. Mommy visited me in a dream. She said Daddy was helping someone, and that made her smile. Clara's heart clenched so hard it hurt. She looked at Noah, who gave a sheepish shrug. Kids and their stories, huh? But Clara saw the faint red line beneath his collar, the healed incision she'd noticed the first night, the one that mirrored her own. Her vision blurred. The drawing trembled slightly in her hands. The light above the hospital bed, bright golden, almost divine, looked exactly like how she'd felt waking up after surgery. The same impossible warmth. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't imagination. It was truth. She looked up, eyes shining with tears she didn't bother to hide. "That's beautiful, Ella." The girl beamed. "Daddy says helping people is like fixing cars, you just have to give them the right parts." Clara swallowed hard, her voice barely steady. "He's right." Ella ran off to fetch more drawings, leaving Clara standing there in the heavy stillness. Noah busied himself under the hood again, humming softly, unaware of the avalanche happening behind her composed face. Clara set the drawing down gently on the counter. Her gaze lingered on the words scrawled across the bottom in bright orange crayon. "Daddy fixed someone's life." Her hands trembled. The air in the shop felt thinner, charged with meaning. He was her donor. There was no doubt anymore. Every cell in her body knew it. The universe had placed the evidence right in front of her, a child's innocence framing the truth no adult could dare to say aloud. When Noah turned around, she quickly wiped her eyes. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said too quickly. "Just something in my eye." He smiled, unaware. "Happens a lot in this place. Dust and stories everywhere." "Stories?" she echoed softly. He leaned against the counter, wiping his hands. "Every car that comes in has a story. Someone late for work, someone heading to see a newborn, someone trying to get home after a fight. You fix a car, you fix a story. Sometimes you don't even realize it." Clara's eyes stung again. "You believe that?" "I have to," he said simply. "Otherwise all this noise and grease wouldn't mean much." She studied him, this man who'd spoken the words she'd been too empty to believe. He'd given her life, and he didn't even know it. And now he stood here, living paycheck to paycheck, raising a daughter alone, probably wondering if kindness still mattered in a world like this. She wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to fall apart and say, "You saved me. You gave me more than I ever deserved." But another part of her, the one still burdened with pride and guilt, held her tongue. How could she thank him without breaking the purity of what he'd done? How could she repay him without turning his selflessness into a transaction? Money would insult him. Recognition would embarrass him. Pity would crush him. So she said nothing. When he finished the repair, he walked her to the car. "This time it should hold," he said. She smiled faintly, voice soft. "I'm sure it will." The words meant something entirely different to her. As she opened the car door, Ella came running with a paper cup. "Wait, I made lemonade for you." Clara accepted it carefully, the ice clinking. "Thank you, Ella. It looks wonderful." The girl grinned. "It's my special recipe. Daddy says it helps people feel better when they're sad." Clara's throat tightened. "It really does." Noah waved as she drove off, unaware of how much the world had shifted for her in those few minutes. By the time Clara reached home, her hands were still shaking. The city lights blurred through her windshield, streaking like tears. She parked outside her building and sat motionless, the lemonade melting in her cup holder. She pulled the drawing from her purse and stared at it under the streetlight. A father in a hospital bed, a child's love shining above him, and a bright golden light, the same light that had returned to her life through his sacrifice. The guilt came slow, quiet, and unbearable. He'd risked everything for a stranger, and now he was working through pain he couldn't afford to treat. Clara pressed the paper to her chest, whispering through trembling lips, "How do I thank a man who doesn't want to be thanked?" She had no answer, only the ache of realization and a resolve forming quietly beneath it. She couldn't repay him with money. She couldn't repay him with fame. But she could honor the gift, not with words but with actions that meant something. And as the night closed around her, one thought rose clear above all the noise. If he could give life to someone he didn't know, then I can give meaning to the life he saved. That was the moment Clara Vance, the woman who once measured worth in profit, began to understand what true wealth really meant. The offer 900. The invitation arrived 3 days later, printed on thick, cream-colored paper with the embossed silver logo of Vance Technologies. Noah almost threw it away, thinking it was junk mail. It wasn't until he saw his name typed neatly at the bottom, Mr. Noah Arden, owner, Arden Auto Repair, that he stopped, reread it twice, and frowned. It was from Clara Vance herself, the woman he'd met twice, once with a broken car, and again with lemonade. We're seeking a new independent vendor for vehicle maintenance for our executive fleet. I'd appreciate your time for a brief consultation at headquarters this Friday at 11. Sincerely, Clara Vance. Noah stared at the note for a long time. The handwriting at the bottom, an actual pen signature, not printed, gave it weight. Still, he couldn't understand why he wasn't even a proper company. Just one man with a small garage, a child and a worn-out set of tools. Friday morning, he ironed his only collared shirt, the same one he wore to his wife's funeral. He polished his boots until they shone and told Ella he had an important meeting. She gave him a high five and said, "You'll crush it, Daddy." But when he stepped into the marble lobby of Vance Tower, he felt the same smallness he'd known all his life pressed down on him again. The air smelled like perfume and power. Glass walls, silent elevators, suits moving briskly like a current he didn't belong in. A receptionist smiled tightly. "Mr. Arden, Miss Vance will see you shortly." He nodded, clutching his cap in both hands. When the elevator doors opened, a young assistant guided him to a vast glass-walled conference room. Clara stood near the window, sunlight cutting across her immaculate blazer. For a brief second he thought she looked different. Softer, almost nervous. She turned, her smile quiet but genuine. "Mr. Arden, I'm so glad you came. Thank you for inviting me," he said, voice low, careful. "I hope there wasn't some mistake." "None at all," she replied. "Please, have a seat." He sat stiffly in the leather chair, feeling it swallow him whole. "I've been reviewing potential vendors for our company's vehicle maintenance," she began. "Your shop came highly recommended." Noah blinked. "Highly recommended? By who?" Clara smiled faintly. "Let's just say good work has a way of speaking for itself." He chuckled awkwardly. "Well, ma'am, my place isn't much. I mostly handle old sedans and delivery vans, not corporate fleets." "That's exactly why I wanted to meet you," she said. "You don't cut corners, and you don't overcharge. I value." He hesitated, unsure if this was real or charity. "I'd be honored, but I'm just a one-man shop." "Then we'll start small," she said simply. "A few vehicles at first. If it works out, we'll expand." Before he could respond, the door swung open. A tall man in a tailored suit walked in without knocking, smug, sharp, the kind of man who'd never had to earn the air he breathed. "Clara," he said smoothly, "you didn't tell me we were interviewing mechanics in-house now." She exhaled. "Beckett. This isn't a discussion." Beckett Lang, her CFO. Noah recognized the name from news articles. The type of executive who smiled in boardrooms and bled companies dry behind the scenes. He smirked at Noah. "You must be the applicant. I can see why Clara wanted to meet you herself. Quite the resume, grease and all." Noah stood, instinctively straightening. "Sir, I just came to talk about cars." "Cars," Beckett repeated, the word dripping with amusement. "Ms. Vance, with all due respect, our executive fleet includes imported vehicles worth more than this man's entire shop. Surely we can afford professionals." Clara's voice cut sharp through the air. "Mr. Arden is a professional." Beckett's grin widened. "Oh, I don't doubt he's good with a wrench. I just didn't realize we were adding charity work to the company's portfolio." The insult hung between them. Noah's jaw tightened, but he didn't lash out. Instead, he said quietly, "Sir, I'm not here for charity. I'm here because I fix things that need fixing. Doesn't matter what they're worth. Cars, roofs, people, they all break the same way." The room went still. Even Beckett's smirk faltered. Clara's gaze lingered on Noah, her eyes softening with something close to admiration. Beckett cleared his throat, forcing a chuckle. "Touching philosophy, but sentiment doesn't balance budgets." Clara turned to him. "Neither does arrogance." He opened his mouth, but her tone left no space for argument. "Meeting's over, Beckett. Thank you for your input." The CFO hesitated, his jaw clenching before he finally left, muttering something about optics. When the door closed, Noah exhaled slowly. "Didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," she said gently. "You reminded me why I do this." He tilted his head. "Do what?" "Run this company," she said. "Somewhere along the way I forgot what it was for. Maybe it's time I remember." Her voice softened, her gaze lingering on the faint scar above his collar, the one that mirrored her own beneath the silk fabric. "You have a quiet strength, Mr. Arden. The kind this place has lost." He looked down, awkward, unsure how to take a compliment like that. "Just trying to do right by my kid. That's exactly why I trust you." He blinked. "Trust me. I'd like to move forward with the contract." she said, her tone composed but eyes bright with something deeper. Full maintenance for the fleet. Starting next quarter. You'll hire a small team. I'll handle the paperwork. Noah hesitated, searching her face for the catch. You don't owe me that. Her expression flickered, almost imperceptibly. I know. Silence stretched. Then she extended her hand. So, partners. He smiled faintly, shaking it. Partners. Her palm was warm, familiar. For a fleeting second, she wanted to tell him everything about the kidney, the hospital, the sleepless nights replaying what he'd done. But she couldn't. Not yet. He left a few minutes later, shoulders squared, walking through the same marble halls that had once made him feel small. Now each step sounded steady, grounded. Clara watched from her office window as he crossed the lobby below, a single figure moving through a world that had never noticed him before. Beckett's words still echoed in her mind. The janitor mechanic is our vendor. She smiled to herself. Yes, because for the first time in years she realized what her empire had been missing. Not brilliance, not ambition, conscience. And somehow that conscience had walked into her life wearing oil-stained boots and quietly reminded her what real strength looked like. The sky above the city was streaked with the last light of dusk when Clara finally made her decision. For weeks the truth had lived inside her like an unhealed wound, pulsing, demanding release. She'd built her empire on logic, control, and precision. But this secret had undone her completely. Every board meeting, every elevator ride, every moment she'd seen Noah's name on a vendor report. It all brought the same ache. He didn't know. And he deserved to. She asked her assistant to clear her evening, then drove herself to the small auto shop. The neon open sign flickered against the dark. Noah was inside, sleeves rolled up, finishing a repair. Ella was coloring in a corner of the office, humming softly. The sight of them together, simplicity, warmth, realness, twisted something deep inside Clara. When he looked up and saw her, he smiled in surprise. Ms. Vance, didn't expect to see you after hours. Just Clara, she said. Do you have a minute? He wiped his hands on a rag. Sure. Everything okay with the cars? This isn't about the cars. Her tone made him pause. He motioned toward a chair. You can sit if you like. She didn't. Her hands were trembling slightly, though she hid them in her coat pockets. There's something I need to tell you, and I need you to listen all the way through before you anything. He frowned, confused. All right. She took a breath so deep it almost hurt. Noah, the reason I found you, the reason I brought you to my company wasn't just business. His brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Her voice wavered. The surgery you had, months ago. The donation. He froze. How do you know about that? She met his eyes, steady, glistening, because it was my surgery. Silence, pure and heavy. She swallowed. It was your kidney, Noah. You saved me. The words hung in the air like thunder before the storm. He stared at her, as if waiting for the punchline. No, that's not possible. The donation was anonymous. It was, she whispered. I didn't know until after. I hired someone. I couldn't stop wondering who'd done it. And when I met you, I didn't know at first. But I recognized the scar, the timing. Then your daughter's drawing. He stepped back, shaking his head. You looked into me? Yes. You hired me out of guilt. No, her voice cracked. Out of gratitude. Out of awe. I just didn't know how to face you. Noah's jaw tightened. You had everything. Money, power, doctors. And I was barely getting by. You could have told me the truth. She flinched. I tried to. 12 times. But every time I looked at you, I realized anything I said would sound small compared to what you did. He turned away, running a hand over his face. You should have let it stay anonymous. That's how it was supposed to be. I know, she said softly. But every time I woke up and felt alive again, I knew it was because of someone who didn't even know my name. That kind of silence eats at you. Noah let out a low, bitter laugh. You think I did it to make you feel guilty? No, she whispered. I think you did it because you're the kind of man who fixes what's broken, even when it's not his to fix. He turned then, eyes blazing, tears glinting at the edges. You think that makes it easier? You walk in here, tell me I gave you my kidney, and what I'm supposed to feel proud. You built your world out of steel and glass, Clara. Mine's built out of rent payments and hospital bills. I'm not here to pity you, she said, stepping closer. I'm here because I finally understand what you gave me. You didn't just save my life, you made me human again. Her words landed softly but deeply. Noah blinked, the anger in his face dissolving into something more fragile. Human. She nodded, I'd forgotten what empathy felt like, what it meant to care about something that couldn't make me richer. When I found out it was you, a father who works until his hands bleed just keep his daughter smiling, I realized how empty I'd been. You gave me life, but more than that, you gave me meaning. His throat worked as he tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, Ella's drawing. She'd kept it all this time. I've looked at this every night, she said. Your daughter drew light over your bed. Do you know what that looked like to me? He stared at the paper, his voice quiet. Hope. Yes, she said. Hope. Something I hadn't felt in years. A long silence followed. Heavy, but no longer hostile. He finally sat down, rubbing his palms together. You know, I used to wonder who it was. The person who got it. I told myself maybe it was someone who'd make the world better. She smiled weakly. I'm trying. He met her eyes again, softer now. Why now? Why tell me this today? Because pretending not to know you was worse than the fear of saying it out loud. And because you deserve to know that your kindness didn't vanish into some void. It changed everything. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. You didn't owe me that, but I'm glad you told me. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft buzz of the shop lights. Then Noah exhaled shakily, a faint smile breaking through. So, the rich woman I saved is my client now. Clara laughed through her tears. I guess so. He chuckled too, the first real sound of release between them. You know, he said, when my wife was dying she told me to keep fixing things. Maybe this is what she meant. Clara's eyes shone. Maybe she knew what kind of man you'd need to be. Their gazes met, two people from opposite worlds, connected by one act of impossible grace. In that moment, all the tension, the guilt, the distance dissolved. It wasn't donor and recipient anymore. It was something simpler, pure. Two souls, who had given and received in equal measure. She whispered, "Thank you, Noah, for everything I didn't know how to say." He smiled faintly. You already did. Outside, the neon open sign flickered softly in the night. Two halves of a world finally joined, glowing together in quiet peace. It began with a headline. Advanced Technologies Under Fire, CEO's personal ties to new vendor raise questions. Within hours, Clara's name trended across every business outlet. Someone on the board, likely Beckett, had leaked her connection to Noah, twisting generosity into scandal. The narrative was simple and poisonous. CEO rewards her secret donor with lucrative contracts. By morning, an emergency board summons landed in her inbox. Ethics review hearing 2 p.m. sharp. Attendance mandatory. When she called Noah, her voice trembled for the first time in years. They're accusing me of favoritism, she said quietly. Of using your contract to cover a bribe. Noah fell silent. You want me to come? I won't ask you to defend me, she said. But the truth deserves a witness. He hesitated, thinking of Ella at school, of the last time he'd stood in a room full of people who measured worth by titles. But then he remembered her face the night she'd confessed, stripped of pride, human.
I'll be there, he said.
The boardroom was colder than usual, the polished table lined with silent judgment. Cameras from internal press waited outside the glass. Beckett sat opposite Clara, his expression polite and venomous. Ms. Vance, he began smoothly, you've awarded a corporate fleet contract to Mr. Noah Arden, the same individual, our sources claim, who provided you with an organ transplant. Would we like to explain this coincidence? Clara met his gaze calm. Yes, I would. She rose slowly. Mr. Arden never asked for recognition, money, or position. He didn't even know who I was. I made him a vendor because he represents everything this company was supposed to stand at. Integrity, humility, and humanity. If that's a conflict of interest, then I accept full responsibility for believing in decency. Murmurs rippled around the table. Beckett smirked. A fine speech, but I'd rather hear from Mr. Arden himself. All eyes turned as Noah entered, awkward in his clean shirt, hat in hand. He nodded once to Clara, then looked straight at the board. You're wondering if she bought my kidney. His voice was steady, low and clear. She didn't. I didn't even know her name when I donated. I gave it freely, because someone needed it. That's all. A few members shifted uncomfortably. One woman whispered, he did it anonymously. Yes, Noah said. And she never owed me a thing. What she gave me the chance to see someone live, that's enough. Beckett opened his mouth, but Noah wasn't finished. I fix things for a living, he said simply. Engines, brakes, whatever's broken. Turns out kindness works the same way. It runs smoother when no one's trying to profit off it. Silence followed. Real, heavy silence. Then the chair of the board leaned forward. "Thank you, Mr. Arden. That will be all." As Noah turned to leave, the room erupted. Not with scandal, but with quiet respect. The ethics panel adjourned with no charges. The press outside had their headline, but it wasn't what Beckett wanted. The mechanic who saved the CEO. A gift that redeemed an empire. Later, Clara found Noah in the corridor, exhausted but smiling faintly. "You didn't have to do that," she said.
I know.
He replied. "But some truths don't belong in the dark." For the first time, she let out a shaky laugh. "You realize you just saved me twice?" He shrugged. "Guess I'm consistent." And as they stepped out of the building into the sunlight, both understood what the headlines could never capture. Kindness doesn't need defense, it survives even under scrutiny. Spring arrived quietly, the way healing always does, not with fireworks but with sunlight through open windows. Months had passed since the hearing. The scandal faded, replaced by something far more enduring. Purpose. The new foundation launched on a bright April morning. Its name shimmered in brushed steel letters across the glass entryway, the Arden Foundation for Organ Awareness. Inside, Clara stood before the small gathered crowd. Journalists, doctors, former patients, volunteers, her voice steady but warm. "This foundation," she said, "was born from an act of quiet courage. It exists so no one has to face illness or loss alone again. Because kindness, when shared, multiplies." She didn't name Noah in her speech. She didn't have to. He stood beside her, not as a symbol but as the soul of the mission. The man who had given life, and somehow taught her how to live it. When she finished, applause filled the hall. Noah gave her a modest nod, then moved through the crowd, shaking hands, answering questions, arranging flyers. His badge read Operations Director. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't need to. His presence alone spoke louder than any title. Ella darted between chairs, her hands smudged with paint. On the far wall she was finishing her mural, a field of daisies, stretching toward a rising sun, each petal bright, imperfect, alive. Clara watched her work with misty eyes. "She's quite the artist." Noah smiled. "That's her way of keeping her mom close." Daisies were Chloe's favorite. Clara reached out, brushing a bit of yellow paint from his sleeve. "Then they're mine now too." For a moment they stood in silence, not awkward, not uncertain. Just two lives rebuilt on the same foundation they'd once shared unknowingly. Ella turned, beaming. "What do you think?" "It's perfect," Clara said softly. "It looks like hope." The girl grinned, running back to add one last touch. 3 daisies in the center, their stems intertwined. Outside, the new sign caught the morning light. Arden Foundation. What had begun as a secret sacrifice had become something living, breathing, permanent. Noah fixed things. Claire rebuilt meaning. And together they'd learned that some miracles don't end where the saving begins. They keep growing, like daisies after rain. If this story moved you, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that changed someone's life? Your story might inspire another. Subscribe for more stories about humanity, redemption, and hope. Because sometimes, the smallest sacrifice becomes the greatest legacy.